Welcome back to the Nick Bartlett Show, everyone. So this is going to be part 2 of me interviewing beat writers from around the conference, or excuse me, kind of the non-conference opponents. So today we're going to be focused on San Diego State, and they have matchups against Oregon State and UCLA. And I got to make sure I say this right here, so let me use my cheaters, my phonetics. Today joining me on the show, we have Andre Haghverdian, of East Village Times. And just wanted to get your general thoughts and feel. Took me 2 times to get it right, but thoughts and feel on San Diego State, kind of to get you started here, or anything else you kind of just feeling off the top of your head here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to connect last year regarding some of the non-conference SDSU Pac-12 games, and so looking forward to chatting again today.
Awesome, cool, yeah, of course, and thank you for coming on as always. Appreciate your help. Definitely. I may know a little bit about San Diego State, but I do not claim to be an expert. So first thing I just want to talk about here, we talk, a little bit here. There's a lot of things going around the program. What's just kind of the general vibe, like in regards to how do you feel they're going to perform on the field? Do you think this kind of in their head a little bit, or it's just nothing?
Last year was an extremely disappointing year. They opened up a brand new stadium. It was their 100th season of Aztec football. They had brought in a lot of veterans. They brought in a super senior local quarterback that played at Oregon and Virginia Tech. The expectations were through the roof, and, they fell flat on their face, starting with that game against Arizona and then at Utah and, coach firings on the offensive side. Just a lot went downhill very quickly. And despite, a turnaround in the second half of the season, it still wasn't good enough to to get in the conference championship game, win a bowl game, things like that. So heading into this season, there's a lot of concern, but optimism that they can turn it around. They're a very young team. They lost a lot of players. They lost almost 10 guys to NFL rosters from last year's team that are, going to training camp in the NFL. So replacing a lot of guys has caused some concern from fans. So I think expectations are fairly low. Last year they finished 7-6. I think most fans probably expect around that kind of a record this year too. So it's an opportunity for the young guys to step up and to overachieve, I guess, in a way, or above expectations. But it's just, as fall camp starts next week, it's just a matter of which guys can step in and perform. And, they have a new offensive coordinator with Ryan Lindley, obviously. So they're learning a new offense. So the expectations are probably low considering what they've lost and how they did last year. But, the expectations can be flipped real quickly once you start playing the games.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I know it was a little bit of a rough ending with that loss to Middle Tennessee last year. That's obviously, a lot of turnovers and things like that. Just didn't Middle Tennessee actually have like negative 66 rushing yards or something along those lines?
Mainly because of all the sacks. But yeah, that was a game where the defensive line pretty much dominated, and they were not able to win the game because the offense really had a poor second half.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to tell you though, I'm wearing, it's hidden under here, because we represent more teams than one. But I went to WSU, and I know it may feel a little rough being a San Diego State fan right now. When I went to WSU, I promise you, it was the years when we were like 0-12. And there was one year I showed up to a game in Seattle, and it was college to me and my buddies were having a few beers, and I showed up to the first quarter. The Cougars were losing to Hawaii 35-0. So just know it does get worse. I promise you. Or hopefully better for you guys, I should say, but it could be worse. So hopping into kind of the meat of stuff here. So what's kind of just your initial thoughts on Jalen Maiden? How do you think he'll fare against like an OSU defense that should be pretty solid, and then a UCLA defense that really probably won't be that good?
The Jalen Maiden is a talented quarterback. He can run. He's strong. He's big. He's accurate at times. He can get the ball to the right guys. Turnovers has been a big problem, as you mentioned, in that Middle Tennessee State game, the last regular season game against Air Force. I believe he had a turnover in every game he played in last year. some just one, and some multiple. And so I think the key for him, and that he's talked about in spring camp, and I'm sure we'll talk about in fall camp, is protecting the football. Because if he protects the football, he can make plays happen with his feet, with his arm. Playing against Oregon State and UCLA is obviously going to be trouble. He's going to have to rely on the offensive line. The offensive line was very poor last year. They could not run the ball. Against Air Force, I think they had -2 rushing yards in that game, which for a San Diego State team is hard to imagine. The days of Rashad Penny and Donnell Pumphrey and those guys, now to get to a point where you're at negative rushing yards for a game. And so if he can protect the football, if the offensive line can give him time, he can make plays. The running game can help him a lot, especially against Power 5 teams that have talented guys up front that could cause mayhem, can get in the backfield. So, to him, it's all about protecting the ball, because he can make plays. He can extend plays with his feet, which is something that San Diego State quarterbacks haven't really had in the last 5-6 years. And so his athleticism can shine, but he needs that time, and he needs to protect the football. And to win those games, to go into a hostile environment in Oregon State, last year they went to Utah and they got beat pretty badly. I think it was 38-7, because they false starts, a lot of snap issues, a lot of timing issues. They could not hear the snap counts. And I think Jalen Mayden wasn't the quarterback back then, so then hopefully he can improve. He can be an improvement from that. But that Oregon State game is probably going to be one of the toughest games on that schedule because of that hostile environment. It's going to be their offensive players. So it's going to come down to protecting the football and making sure the offensive line is in sync with the snap counts, and going from there. UCLA is game of the season, so you would hope that those issues should not be paramount. So I think Jalen Mayden, it's going to come down to protecting the football is the success of the offense, especially against a Power 5 team.
Definitely, that's interesting to hear too, because I remember I could be wrong, he was a freshman last year, right?
Jalen Mayden?
Yeah, am I wrong with that?
Yeah, so he transferred over to San Diego State from Mississippi State. So he was a junior last year. He was actually a senior last year, and this is his super senior season. But it was his first year actually playing on the field, quarterback anyway.
My mistake. Must be confusing with someone. There was someone I was thinking last year. Either way,
their other 2 quarterbacks on the roster were true freshmen last year who played. Kyle Crum and Leo Amabai. But yeah, he's been around for a while, and this is technically his 6th year in college because of a red shirt and a transfer. And so it's his last year, but he hasn't been playing, and last year was the first opportunity he had to start at quarterback.
Okay, no, I'm completely wrong. I appreciate you answering that nicely. No, I must have been thinking of someone else here. So anyways, on to the next question here. So I kind of feel that SDSU usually has a pretty good running back group. You're talking about, Rashad Penny back in the day, looking at Jordan Byrd gone. This year I haven't heard of any names that stand out of the 3 in Jalon Armstead, Cam Davis, and Keenan Christian. Is there a guy that kind of stands out to you that could really, maybe be the guy a little bit?
I think by all accounts, it's going to be Keenan Christian. He's a local San Diego guy. He's a track star. He went to USC. Actually, as a true freshman, he started and had some really good games at USC. And then I believe the following year he was suspended due to an incident with a teammate, and then transferred to San Diego State last year. His speed, he's Jordan Byrd was known for his speed, and it was pretty clear watching games that Keenan Christian was faster than Jordan Byrd. Some of the plays and runs and screens that he took to the house were pretty impressive. And I think the coaching staff is looking for him to be that number 1 running back because his speed is so critical. Now, he had some issues running, inside the tackles, up the middle, things like that. That's not necessarily his strength. But if you can get him on the outside, you can get him in space, one-on-one, on linebackers, on safeties. He's going to make people miss. And I think, he could be that number one guy. And then Jalen Armstead is more of a bigger guy. Last year, he played at 240 in weight. I think from all accounts, he's down to closer to 220, 225, which the coaching staff had been asking him to do. And so he could be kind of that, like Christian and Jalen Armstead could be kind of that thunder and lightning combination of speed and kind of strength. So Jalen Armstead, I think before he had an injury halfway through the season, was, at the top of the FBS leaderboard with like 9 yards per carry. It wasn't that a lot of carries, but he had enough to meet that qualification early in the season. And so he produced at the chances he got, and then he had an ankle injury and that just kind of fell behind on the depth chart and never really got going again. But those two guys are probably the front runners to be, the guys that'll get a bulk of the carries. And then there's some young guys behind them, a Lucky Sutton, which is also a local San Diego guy. So there's a big following behind him. And, people are looking forward to seeing him get some opportunities as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds like they could have a nice little kind of 1-2 punch there, as you mentioned, with Armstead and Christian. And I mean, it would just be nice to see. I think last year was the first year in quite some time that SDSU had average under 4 yards per carry. So that's it'd be nice to see that, improved probably a little bit. If you're a San Diego State fan, out of kind of the wideouts. So we got Mekhi Shaw, who's a returner. There's been a lot of hype about Raphael Williams, but I think actually, I mean, this kind of grouping in a tight end too. But I think Mark Redmond's probably the biggest, at least according to kind of the preseason polls. He seems to be the one getting on the first teams and stuff like that, according to MountainWestConnection.com. Mm-hmm. Out of these three, is there one that stands out to you?
I think Mark Redmond does, strictly because when you listen to Ryan Lindley, the new offensive coordinator, talk about what his offense is going to look like, he talks about mimicking what Utah does with a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator at Utah, was the offensive coordinator at San Diego State for Ryan Lindley's final season at San Diego State as a quarterback in 2011. And then Ryan was an offensive analyst under Andy Ludwig at Utah 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So he's learned a lot from Andy Ludwig, and he's very open about implementing a very similar style that Andy runs at Utah, which, as you know, with Utah, the tight ends that they had, Brent Keithy and Dalton Kincaid, who just got drafted, I think in the late first round or second round. I don't remember exactly, but so that's why I would say Mark Redmond, because I think the tight ends are going to be front and center with the offense. And Mark Redmond played at, was recruited to Washington, so he's got Power 5 experience, and talent level. Even though he did not have a hugely productive year last year, I think he had about 20 catches. He still made second team all conference. That might say more about, the quality of tight ends in the conference last year, but he still made an all conference. And I think there's going to be a big emphasis to get the ball to Mark Redmond in the passing game this year. So I would say him. Mekhi Shaw was very productive last year, was a walk-on, got a scholarship towards the end of the season. He's really the only guy on the roster that's had any productivity on an FBS level. And so they're going to lean on him. Raphael Williams was a really good player at the FCS level at Western Carolina, but it's to be determined how he'll adjust to the FBS level. He had a rough spring. Some of the coaches thought that he hadn't progressed, or he hadn't gotten used to the speed and the physicality that San Diego State plays with during spring camp. So he's a guy to watch definitely for the fall. But he's got speed. He can play over the slot. He can go beat guys deep. So he could be one of those game breakers that they haven't had in a while. But in the spring, I think he might have taken a step back there.
So, I mean, it does sound like obviously the line will have to hold up. We know the line was a really tough spot for SDSU last year. But I mean, between Keenan Christian and the potential Raphael Williams, does feel that you could have two game breakers in a particularly, I mean, I think that could maybe kind of have them hang with UCLA a bit. I'm not maybe as high on UCLA as others are. Oregon State, I agree with you, is going to be tough. But I mean, having 2 game breakers, that's a little bit of threat, at least in Madden. At least in Madden.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I guess kind of just wow, that was lucky. Didn't mean to lead into it, but sometimes it just happens like that a little bit. So yeah, just talking about the offensive line. 3 returning starters. Outside of star guard, Cade Bennett. Is that a good thing, or is that just kind of they're back?
All 3. So one of the other starters is a guy that started at left tackle last year and then started at right tackle the year before. And now he's back to right tackle where he had a better season 2 years ago. Brandon Crenshaw Dixon. I think that's Brandon and Cade Bennett, I think are the top guys who are obviously back. The third guy, Ross Masuli, he had some injuries last year. He had some inconsistencies. But he's a talented guy. He was recruited heavily. I believe he had, big SEC Big 12 offers, and he ended up going to UCLA, ended up going to San Diego State. So, like, he's got the talent level to play with the big boys, and it's time for him to put it together in his, sophomore year. 3rd year in college, but it's technically a sophomore year. They lost a 3-year starter at center, Alama Uluave, who's now with the Dolphins in training camp. They haven't quite – we just had Mike Goff, the offensive line coach, on our podcast recently, and they still do not know who's going to be the starting center. They've got a couple two main guys that are in the mix, third guy potentially that they brought in from Washington via transfer, Miles Murrell. That could be in the mix there too. So I think the main job for the fall camp is to figure out who's going to be the starting center, because at times at practices that I attended over the last 2 years, when Uluave was not the center, they had a lot of snapping issues. And so, they can't have that. That's obviously, if you can't get the quarterback the ball accurately, you're not going to be able to run the plays that are called. And so I think the offensive line, they need to figure out who the starting center is so they can figure out who the starting right guard is, and then they can go from there.
Yeah, no, that's I hear you. I mean, figuring out the center is probably one of the most important things. That's I'm glad you kind of touched on that a bit. Just without a center, life can be pretty difficult, especially higher levels of college football and stuff like that. So I personally think that SDSU, regardless of maybe having a little tough season, I mean, they really blew some games. What was it? Boise State and Fresno State or something off the top of my head. I could be wrong there, but
yeah, the Fresno State game, Aztec fans will never forget that Fresno State game, probably. The way they blew an 18-point lead with a minute left in the third quarter, just the turnovers, onside kick recovery that they bounced off his shoulder, like the comedy of errors that had to happen in the last 16 minutes of that game for them to lose that game. I don't think Aztec fans will ever forget that one.
Well, now you do. Maybe I undersold. Maybe you do know how it does feel to be a Cougar, at least for one day. You get an honorary because that is the life of a.
Well, I have to be honest. San Diego State sports history obviously was pretty poor. I attended San Diego State to get my master's starting in 2010, which is how I started following the team in that regard. And since then, they've made a bowl game in every season except for the COVID season. And so, like, I haven't felt the issues and the problems and the heartache that so many San Diego State fans for 40, 50 years have, so I guess I could say I'm fortunate to not have to be here through, the more positive times, even though last year they went 7-6, but they made their 13th consecutive bowl game and all the fans thought it was an awful season. And so they've come a long way from where they were, they're winning 2-3 games and they're not making bowl games. So I guess it's a perspective how you look at it.
Definitely. I'm sure well, I'm probably going to rub them the wrong way for the term, but I'm sure some of the old heads will love that you just said that. But I mean, to me, I think that you just kind of, I think it's maybe you just timed it right. Not wrong getting a little lucky or something like that, So I think we're talking for a little longer here, so maybe a little bit shorter on the defense, but hopping over onto the other side of the ball here. Let's see where I'm starting over here. So yeah, I mean, SDSU's defense has been really, really good. Essentially, look at the stat; they've been better. They've not finished lower than 21st in the nation in total defense since 2013. Really, should we just expect the same, or is it going to be a little different? Or your thoughts?
This might be one of their most difficult coaching opportunities with Brady Hoke and Kurt Maddox, the defensive coordinator, because they lost all three of their starting defensive linemen and two of their three starting linebackers. So they're replacing five of their front six. And because those five guys were so good and so dependable, they played a lot of snaps. And so the young guys behind them didn't necessarily get a ton of opportunities. So now they're bringing those young guys up. They brought in some transfers. And now it's a matter of, who's going to fill those starting spots and who's going to be that primary backup depth and how they're going to be able to, they play 3-3-5. They've got the coaching. I don't think the defense is going to fall off a cliff for sure, but it might take them a few weeks to really get rolling in terms of what they want to do. They play fast. They play physical. So getting those guys up to speed, they've got Cody Moon, who was a all-conference linebacker at New Mexico, a conference rival, transferred to San Diego State. Up until a couple of years ago, having transferring within the conference was a big no-no, right? Because you had to sit out 2 years. Now you don't have to sit out any years. And so, they got Cody Moon, who played under Rocky Long 3-3-5 at New Mexico, the same defense essentially. And so that he could be a really big guy to step in for someone like a Michael Shawcroft, who is, a multi-year starter who graduated. Garrett Fountain is the main defensive lineman, defensive end that is poised for a big breakout year now that he's got a starting spot. And then Cooper McDonald, younger brother of Caden McDonald, who transferred over from Washington with Mark Redmond, is now going to be, that main Sam linebacker that could rush the passer, defend the run, and drop into some, short zone against the pass. So those three guys, I think, are going to be vital to the defense continuing to be, top 20, top 21 defense in the country.
Yeah, I don't even think I really realized how much they lost. Obviously, doing a little prep. That yeah, you touched on Moon. Well, I didn't really realize it was that extreme in the front seven. So I guess kind of the secondary, kind of sticking with the losses here. They lost Patrick McMorris to Cal. But there are kind of a couple of notable players. You got Des Malone at cornerback and safety Cedarius Barfield. I just want to make sure I give credit to College Football News. They kind of described him as a smaller guy, but he's pretty much everywhere. Is that accurate? Or anyone else in the secondary that we should know?
Yeah, Des Malone was a guy who came into San Diego State as a safety, and they saw right away that his cover skills were really good, and they moved him to corner last year. And I think he's poised to have a breakout all-conference season this year. He's that good, talented, athletic. I think he's got, from what I've seen in practice and in the games, I think he's got NFL potential. So he's definitely a guy. And Barfield, he's a super senior. He's been around 5 years. He's played a lot. He started out as a corner and then got moved to nickel safety, or the field warrior, as the Aztecs like to call it. The other guy, they brought in two Power 5 safeties, J.D. Coffey from Texas and Deshaun McEwen from TCU, who were guys who didn't play a lot, but had been there for multiple years. And those guys, I think between those two guys and some of the freshmen from last year, they're looking for one guy to step in and replace Patrick McMorris, because McMorris was a huge loss. It was an unexpected loss after spring camp. I think if I said this on our podcast, nothing shocks me anymore with the transfer portal and NIL, but the hearing about Patrick McMorris transferring shocked me, just because he was the leader of the team. He was so a big part of that defense. He went through spring camp. I think family reasons played a part into it, because his brother is an analyst at Cal. His younger brother runs track at Cal. So I think a lot of that family had a lot to do with it, potentially, other than, wanting to showcase his talents for the NFL scouts. And Cal has put, defensive backs in the draft in the last 4 or 5 years. So multiple reasons, but I think it was a huge loss. And so before McMorris's transfer, I would have said their secondary was one of the best, best in the Mountain West, one of the best on the West Coast. Without McMorris, it's harder for me to say that until seeing who can step in. But potentially those two guys from transfers could, and then some guys that were freshmen last year that stepped up. So whoever plays that middle of the football defense, the Aztec position in that 3-3-5, I think is gonna definitely make or break that secondary, because the rest of the pieces are there and they're good. They're really good.
Yeah, I don't think I really I mean I knew that he was a loss, but I don't you're saying essentially they went from one of the best secondaries to kind of almost like a questionable secondary. That speaks volumes. I mean, obviously the safety is the quarterback of the defense, so it makes a little sense there. Unless there's anything else you want to add on the defense, I think we're pretty good. And then I got to just a couple random questions. Some may be football related. Said I'm not really sure why they gave me a show, so some may not be. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. Let's see. I think just kind of ending kind of the summer here on SDSU. What's I personally also I don't feel, just for me, since I'm super like the whitest dude in the world, I don't feel comfortable calling them by their name. So I'm gonna stick with SDSU or San Diego. That's just me. So but like looking at kind of the kind of like old like random questions here or summary stuff. What's just your I mean, I'm trying to get too fancy here. What's your biggest key to the season?
Offensive line. I think if the offensive line can block and open up running lanes for the running backs, give Jalen Maiden time to find receivers, I think the offense can be very productive and enough to win, 8-9 games this year and be in the mix to win a conference championship.
Cool, perfect. And then see, I think we touched on this earlier. We kind of talked on whether last year's team lacked talent or just blew games, maybe kind of somewhere in the middle. But just really, do you have a prediction for kind of the final games here? You thinking they can hang with UCLA? You kind of said it may be rough against Oregon State. What's kind of your final thoughts here a little bit?
Yeah, not quite ready to give a score at this point, but yeah, I think the UCLA game can be a close game, somewhere in the 20s. They're at home. It'll be their third game of the season. Hopefully they win their first two and they're coming in, confident as a 2-0 team with a home game. I think they can play with UCLA. They beat UCLA at the Rose Bowl about 4 or 5 years ago, pretty handily. Obviously, I think there's different teams, different players, but they've done really well against the Pac-12 in that regard. Oregon State game, I think it is going to be a big struggle. First road game, hostile environment. Oregon State is extremely talented. I'm not sure if they've decided on who their quarterback is going to be. I know they have that transfer from Clemson, but they also had a freshman that came in that was supposed to be really good. But yeah, I think the Oregon State game is going to be difficult for them to stay in the game or keep it close. But I think as we get closer to the games, it'll be easier for me to give a more of a predicted score. But right now, it's hard for me to say that they have. I think UCLA, they can win that game. I think Oregon State is going to be difficult to win.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like we're on pretty similar. Maybe a little bit too early to make predictions. If you want to throw out a score, is it too early for you?
I think it's too early there.
Cool. And then since I've been following your Twitter a little bit, I got to see, I can't even say following, you just kind of post some stuff that may be in relation to things that I may like a little bit. So I'm looking at my top 5 90s hip hop artists. You can say they're questionably not 90s. I'd say they are. I got Tupac, Biggie, Jay-Z, this guy called Big L, and Nas. Do you disagree? Agree? What's your thoughts? We were talking hip hop now, so.
Those are 5 of the greatest ever. I love all of them. They're probably not in my favorite top 5, but those are all class legends, and those are people that I've been listening to since I was a teenager, maybe even or before teenager. Big L is a name you don't see too often, so the fact that you put that in there, obviously, Big L He's a guy from New York who was tragically killed in the late '90s. But the music he had put out before then was incredible, and it was a shame because he had a huge future ahead of him.
Definitely. But so this is my question though. Who's your top five? It's okay to disagree, but I gotta know who your top five is. That's important. I think you probably got a little more.
Top five favorite MCs?
Yeah, it could be top five favorite, just your top five, whatever. It doesn't gotta be. It's just whatever's chill.
I would put Rakim, Andre 3000 from Outkast, Black Thought from The Roots, Mos Def, and Common are probably my top five.
Okay, I respect your taste. See, I went with more of the basic top five. I'd say my two people I listen to the most, I can't say they are better than anyone I'd put on my top five, but I'd say definitely I was probably addicted to Lil Wayne a little more than I liked to admit, and then I hopped over to Kid Cudi for a long time. So that's kind of my random thoughts there. And so here is the final question that I always end with. Did you watch WWE as a kid?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting. I saw the head nod and got way too excited there. Who is your favorite wrestler of all time, and why?
My favorite wrestler was Sting, pre-NWO. Like the Sting that had like the colorful face mask and the colorful tights and the bleached blonde hair. He was my favorite wrestler of all time. I loved his swagger, his confidence. I forget what is the sharpshooter, not the sharpshooter, but it was the same move as the Bret Hart's sharpshooter, but he called it a Scorpion Deathlock, right? Something like that. And I don't know, I just loved all the voice stuff that he did pre-matches. Just his intensity, his athleticism. He was my favorite.
All right, no, I appreciate that answer. But I know Sting's actually working with a guy from Seattle named Darby Allin now over in AEW. But this is a football podcast, so I'll leave it at that. Kind of summarizing. I want to make sure I do this right, so please correct me if I'm wrong here. Kind of summarizing what you said here about SDSU. Looks like quarterback. We're kind of looking. We have a playmaker, but there could be a little bit of turnover problems. Still looks like we could have a nice little 1-2 punch at the running back position. Wide out needs to be seen a little bit. But bottom line, I think that they may have two explosive players, which could be good. Offensive line. What was your quick takeaway on the offensive line? I got that off the top of my head.
They've got some pieces. If they can solidify who the starting center is, I think that could go a long way for them to be successful in 2023.
The center, that is what it was. On the defense side of the ball, they lost essentially everyone in their front seven. On the back end, I believe it's Patrick McMorris, and so it could be a little bit rougher than usual. But SDSU historically does have a really good defense. So yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, thank you for coming on the show.
Just special teams is always a big thing for San Diego State. They've got a kicker, Jack Browning, who basically does all three: kicking, punting, and kickoffs. And he's poised to have – he had a great year last year, especially as a punter. I think, he's poised to have another tremendous year, hopefully be on the award watch list for – the Ray Guy Award and the Lou Groza Award. So he's a name to keep an eye on because he can do all three, just like Matt Ariza did when he was here 2 years ago. So special teams is always a big thing for San Diego State, and with an offense and a defense that's got young pieces, special teams can help them win some games that maybe they would win regardless.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you threw in that little piece about special teams. I may have overlooked that. All right, I'm going to try and get this right on the first time. Today joining me on the show, we had Andre Haghverdian. Did I get it? Nice.
Yes.
Nice. And he is from East Village Times. Thank you for coming on the show again, and adios, everyone. Deuces.